The world right now is not the world your parents prepared you for, and deep down, you already know that. The headlines keep changing, the rhetoric keeps escalating, and the people in power keep moving pieces on a chessboard that most Americans are never allowed to see clearly. But here's what nobody is telling you plainly, and what you deserve to hear without the spin: nuclear risk is not a fringe theory anymore. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute confirmed in its 2025 yearbook that a dangerous new nuclear arms race is emerging at a time when arms control regimes are severely weakened. Of the total global inventory of an estimated 12,241 warheads in January 2025, about 9,614 were in military stockpiles for potential use, and around 2,100 of the deployed warheads were kept in a state of high operational alert on ballistic missiles, nearly all belonging to Russia or the United States. That's not ancient Cold War history. That is the world you are waking up in today, in 2026, while you scroll your phone and fill your gas tank and wonder why everything feels so unstable. A 4-day crisis in May 2025 saw two nuclear-armed states, India and Pakistan, in open conflict, alarming observers for its potential to escalate. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence itself acknowledged in its 2025 threat assessment that heightened and prolonged political military tensions between Moscow and Washington, coupled with Russia's growing confidence in its battlefield superiority, have created an increased risk of nuclear war. So this video is not about fear, it is about something far more powerful than fear. It is about what you actually do in the first 30 minutes. Because those 30 minutes, according to every credible piece of government science on this subject, are the difference between life and death for you and every person you love. Now, before we get into the 9 steps, I want you to understand something that most of the mainstream conversation gets completely wrong. People talk about nuclear war as if it is automatically a death sentence for everyone, as if survival is impossible, as if the only rational response is helplessness. And that narrative, I want to suggest to you, is not an accident. A population that believes resistance is futile is a population that never prepares, never organizes, never demands accountability from the people making decisions that could trigger exactly these kinds of catastrophic events. So the first act of genuine preparedness is recognizing that survival is entirely possible and that the knowledge you are about to gain is real, scientifically grounded, and comes directly from FEMA and the broader emergency management architecture of the United States government. FEMA's own guidance is unambiguous. Nuclear explosions can cause significant damage and casualties from blast, heat, and radiation, but you can keep your family safe by knowing what to do and being prepared if it occurs. That sentence from your own government deserves to be read twice because it directly contradicts the fatalism that gets pumped into the culture every time someone raises this topic. They are telling you explicitly that preparation works, so let's use it. The very first thing to understand is how the timeline actually works, because most people imagine that a nuclear detonation leaves no window for action. That is simply not true. FEMA may issue warning of a nuclear attack to jurisdictions. If the warning is due to a nuclear-armed ballistic missile, those jurisdictions may only have 15 to 30 minutes between the alert and detonation. 15 to 30 minutes. That sounds terrifying at first, but think about what you can actually do in 15 minutes if you know exactly what to do. Most people have no idea, and that is the entire gap that this video exists to close. And even in a scenario with zero warning, the physics of a nuclear detonation still give you a window. Fallout generally begins to accumulate about 15 minutes after the explosion. This window gives survivors of the blast time to find adequate shelter. 15 minutes of grace. The question is whether you are going to use that 15 minutes with knowledge or waste it in panic. Step 1 is the most counterintuitive thing I can tell you, and it is probably the most important. Do not run. Everything in your biology screams at you to move, to flee, to get away. But the science says the opposite. After a detonation, you will have 10 minutes or more to find adequate shelter before fallout arrives. If a multi-story building or a basement can be safely reached within a few minutes of the explosion, go there immediately. The safest buildings have brick or concrete walls. Underground parking garages and subways can also provide good shelter. You are not trying to outrun the blast. That ship has sailed. What you are managing now is radiation exposure from fallout. And the single most powerful variable you control is the mass of material between you and the fallout particles outside. So the directive is not away, it is in. The nearest substantial building is your first target. Step 2 is understanding the geometry of protection, because not all parts of a building are equal. This is a detail that almost nobody talks about, and it could make an enormous practical difference. the protection factor of a shelter location depends on the shielding from radiation offered by walls and the distance from outdoor fallout particles. Even the basement of a one-story wood frame building can increase protection from radiation by a factor of 10, which is considered adequate by the Federal Planning Guidance for Response to a Nuclear Detonation. Think about what that means in practical terms. The basement of even a modest wooden house cuts your radiation exposure by a factor of 10. Now imagine a concrete basement, or the core of a large office building. The subfloors or core of office and apartment buildings provide high levels of protection with a protection factor of 100 or higher. So step 2 is, once you are inside, go down, go to the center, get away from windows, get away from exterior walls, and get as much material around you as physics will allow. If you are in a high-rise, counterintuitively, you want to be near the middle floors, because upper floors get fallout deposited on the roof above you, and ground floors have fallout right outside. The sweet spot is the interior core at the middle floor, or better still, a basement. This is specific, actionable knowledge. Use it. Step 3 is decontamination of yourself, and you need to do this as quickly as possible once you are inside. The first step should be getting inside the nearest building, taking off any contaminated clothes, and then heading to the basement or middle of the structure as far away from windows and walls as possible. Contaminated clothing can carry fallout particles directly against your skin and continue irradiating you from the outside in. Remove your outer garments the moment you get inside, ideally leaving them near the entrance rather than carrying them deeper into the building. Then wash your face and hands with soap and water if it is available. Do not use conditioner on your hair because conditioner can bind radioactive particles to the hair shaft. You are not trying to become sterile. You are trying to reduce the total radiation dose your body receives, and removing external contamination makes a measurable, meaningful difference to that number. This is not speculation, this is radiological science applied to survival. Step 4 is controlling the air that gets into your shelter space. This is something people overlook completely in their mental rehearsal of what a nuclear emergency looks like. If possible, turn off fans, air conditioners, and forced air heating units that bring air in from the outside, close fireplace dampers. The outside air in the hours after a detonation is carrying radioactive particles. Every air conditioning unit that is pulling from outside is pulling those particles into your shelter. Every open fireplace damper is a channel for contaminated air to enter your space. So the moment you are inside and situated, your next task is to reduce the air exchange between inside and outside as much as you possibly can. Wet towels under doors, closed vents, sealed gaps, none of these have to be perfect, but every reduction in air infiltration reduces the total dose you receive. This is a step that costs you nothing in time and pays significant dividends in survivability. Step 5, and this is where the psychological dimension becomes critical. Stay where you are. Family in the house should stay where they are and not try to meet up with relatives, or they risk radiation exposure. I want to dwell on this for a moment because it is the step that will be hardest for most Americans to actually follow. Every instinct you have as a parent, as a spouse, as a child, is going to pull you toward the people you love. You are going to want to get in your car and go find them. And if you do that, you may be trading a 90% chance of survival for something close to zero. This is not coldness. It is love, expressed as discipline. The people you care about are most likely to survive if they too shelter in place. Your job in the first 24 hours is not to reunite the family. Your job is to stay alive so that reunification is possible after the acute phase has passed. Fallout is most dangerous in the first few hours after the detonation when it is giving off the highest levels of radiation. The radiation intensity drops off with extraordinary speed. It takes time for fallout to arrive back to ground level, often more than 15 minutes for areas outside of the immediate blast damage zones. And after the first 24 to 48 hours, the environment outside is dramatically safer than it was in those first critical hours. So the math is clear: shelter now, reunite later. Step 6 is staying informed, and this matters more than most people realize because the situation will be evolving rapidly, and your decisions about when to leave shelter, which direction to move, and where resources are available will all depend on accurate information. Have several ways to receive emergency alerts. Download the FEMA app and receive real-time alerts from the National Weather Service. A hand-cranked or battery-powered radio is one of the most valuable pieces of preparedness equipment you can own, precisely because in an electromagnetic pulse environment and a power outage environment, your phone may stop working. The alerts that will come through official emergency broadcast channels will tell you when the acute phase has passed, where shelters and resources are located, what zones are being evacuated, and what the current radiation readings are in your area. The people who survive nuclear emergencies historically are not always the strongest or the fastest. They are often the ones who had the best information at the right moment and acted on it with discipline. Step 7 is water and food management inside your shelter, because you may be sheltering for considerably longer than people expect. Staying inside for at least 24 hours can protect you and your family until it is safe to leave the area, but based on your location, the source of the radiation, and other factors, local officials may advise you to shelter in place for as long as a month. A month. Let that sink in for a moment. The food and water that is already inside your shelter is what you have to work with. Any water in sealed containers, in pipes, in your water heater, all of that is clean. Any food in sealed packaging is safe to eat. Do not go outside to retrieve food or water. Do not open exterior doors unless absolutely necessary. If you have a bathtub, fill it immediately after the event. That stored water is a resource. Prioritize hydration, because radiation sickness is made significantly worse by dehydration. This is not complex survival science. This is elementary human biology applied to a specific set of circumstances. Step 8 involves managing the people around you, because nuclear emergencies are social events as much as they are physical ones. Panic is contagious. So is calm. If you are in a shelter with others, family, co-workers, strangers in a public building, your ability to maintain composure and convey clear, accurate information will have an outsized effect on the collective outcome. People who panic leave shelter prematurely. People who freeze fail to take the protective actions that could save them. The specific knowledge you now carry about fallout timelines, about protection factors, about the 24-hour sheltering guidance makes you exponentially more valuable to the people around you in that moment. This is one of the quiet arguments for widespread public education on these matters, and one of the reasons the conversation is worth having even when it is uncomfortable. A population that knows what to do is a population that survives in much higher numbers. During the first hours after a nuclear event, radiation levels will be the highest, confusion will be high, and the immediate local response will be essential in saving lives. That immediate local response includes you. Step 9, and this is the one that connects everything, is the decision about when and how to leave your shelter once the acute phase has passed. This is where many people make fatal errors even after successfully surviving the initial event. The rule here is simple. You leave when authorities tell you it is safe to leave, or when your battery-powered radio confirms that the acute radiation phase in your zone has passed, and you leave in the direction that takes you away from the prevailing wind direction from the blast site. Take shelter as soon as you can, even if you are many miles from ground zero where the attack occurred. Radioactive fallout can be carried by the winds for hundreds of miles. The inverse of this is also true. Wind carries fallout away from the blast center in a plume, and if you are moving perpendicular to that plume rather than through it, your exposure drops dramatically. Knowing the prevailing wind direction in your region is therefore a piece of preparedness knowledge worth acquiring before an event, not during it. Once you have left shelter and you are moving, keep your skin covered. Wear any available mask or improvised face covering to reduce particle inhalation, and move with purpose toward resources, a FEMA shelter, higher ground, or a community with infrastructure intact. Now I want to zoom out from the 9 steps for a moment, because I think the deeper conversation here is one that not enough people are willing to have. The reason this information matters is not that nuclear war is inevitable. It is that the conditions that make nuclear war possible are more present today than they have been at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the public conversation has not kept pace with that reality. Escalating tensions between the world's 2 largest nuclear powers come only months before the last remaining US-Russia nuclear arms control treaty expires. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence specifically warned in 2025 that Russia's growing confidence in its battlefield superiority and defense industrial base has created an increased risk of nuclear war that generates both urgency and complications for US foreign policy. These are not fringe voices. These are the official assessments of the American intelligence community. They are telling you that the risk is real and that it is rising. The appropriate response to that information is not paralysis, and it is not denial. It is preparation combined with clear-eyed engagement with the political and geopolitical forces that are bringing us closer to the edge. The global architecture that kept nuclear weapons from being used for 8 decades is under serious strain right now. A dangerous new nuclear arms race is emerging at a time when arms control regimes are severely weakened. with the pace of dismantlement of retired warheads slowing while the deployment of new nuclear weapons is accelerating. Allies are less certain of the US's extended deterrence, and some are pondering their own options. The post-World War II order, the one built on institutions, treaties, and mutual constraints on the use of ultimate weapons, is not being quietly maintained. It is being actively dismantled, piece by piece, by powers on multiple sides of the geopolitical divide, and by a general failure of leadership that has allowed crisis after crisis to escalate without genuine diplomatic resolution. The war in Ukraine, the tension across the Taiwan Strait, the fragile ceasefire structures in the Middle East, the arms buildup in East Asia, each of these represents a potential ignition point, and they are not happening in isolation. They are happening simultaneously in a world where the guardrails have weakened. What does this mean for you as an ordinary American? It means that the knowledge we just walked through is not paranoia, it is not prepper culture or conspiracy thinking. It is the same knowledge that FEMA, the CDC, the Red Cross, and the Department of Defense have been quietly developing, updating, and publishing. Knowledge that they genuinely want the public to have, precisely because they know that a prepared population survives in larger numbers and requires less emergency response capacity in the critical initial hours. The gap is not in the information, the gap is in the public's awareness of and engagement with that information. And the purpose of every conversation like this one is to close that gap one person at a time. Here is what I want to leave you with. The people who will make it through the scenarios that nobody wants to talk about are not the people who had the fanciest bunkers or the most expensive gear. The most important protective action is sheltering immediately after a nuclear detonation, staying sheltered for 12 to 24 hours, and listening to authorities. It is disciplined, it is calm, it is informed action taken in the first 30 minutes. That is the entire variable. Before the blast, know your nearest solid buildings, know which direction the prevailing winds blow, know how to seal a room, keep a battery-powered radio in your home. In the first seconds, get inside, get down, get away from windows. In the first 15 minutes, decontaminate, close vents, fill available water containers. In the first 24 hours, stay put, stay informed, stay calm. That sequence, executed by a person who has taken the time to understand why each step matters, is the difference between a statistic and a survivor. And every person watching this video right now has the capacity to be that second thing.